Welcome to Comedy Album Book Club. This week we are joined by the hilarious Melanie Dahling. Melanie chats about the one, the only, the cake boss, Paul F. Tompkins. Stay tuned. Hey everyone, it's your host Matt Ardill. This week I've got a great episode. I sit with Melanie Dahling. She is a comedian from Winnipeg, working out of Toronto. She works with Howl Roar Records. They are an incredible record label. They do comedy albums. I've been lucky enough to go to a bunch of their tapings. They are awesome. She is awesome. We are talking about Paul F. Tompkins' album, Impersonal. Paul F. Tompkins, you may know from Comedy Bang Bang, the Paul F. Tompcast. Basically, half of the podcasts coming out of LA. He was a featured writer and performer on Mr. Show. He was in a hilarious parody reality show, Bajillionaires, excuse me. He's just everywhere. Dr. Miggly Moo in the Star Trek cartoon that's on currently. Yeah, Impersonal is his 2007 album. It is great, as you will hear today. It is actually very hard to find, and if you want an audio CD, it is $227 US. Actually, excuse me, $227.75 US on Amazon. So it's a hard find, but it's worth it. Alternately, you can stream it on your streaming services for free. But that said, settle in. Grab a tub of popcorn, maybe some cake made by the cake boss, and enjoy the show.
Recently, I was in a car with some friends, and we were at a stoplight because the law is the law. So, as we're waiting for the light to change, we see this goth girl run across the street. A goth girl running. You don't often see goth people run. I think because obviously it spoils the whole image, right? You can't be in a hurry and goth. But number two, they all got those crazy shoes on. You can fall off and break your ankles. Safety first. Even the goths know it. So goth girl running. Here's what a genius I am. I roll down the window and I yell out, "Hey, where's the funeral?" Yeah. So I had to then check with the people in the car that was as hilarious as I thought it was. Like, that was pretty funny, right? Turn around to everybody. Not done being an asshole yet. When I got home, I called people up to tell them, you'll never guess the most hilarious thing that I just said. And now I'm telling all of you. Will the circle be unbroken? Is that a goth song?
Welcome to Comedy Album Book Club. This week we are joined by Melanie Dahling. Thank you for joining us today, Melanie. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am good. I am super good because I love Paul F. Tompkins, and you chose his 2007 album, Impersonal.
Yes, I'm so excited to dive into this because I love this album. It like came at a really pivotal time for me, I guess I'll say. But and I didn't listen to it when it first came out. I was
Mhm.
kind of I was a Johnny Come Lately Paul F. Tompkins fan. But it's so funny because I work for Howl Roar Records where I produce comedy albums. And listening back to this album this week, I was like, this is full of so many things I would discourage in any other artist, but he's like no one else. I
Yeah.
just love him so much.
Yeah, it like I noticed like I feel it was maybe like multiple sets or improv or something because you can hear at the end of each track there's like a fade out, so it doesn't feel quite as but I mean it worked. Like I loved the album. I loved the album.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, it was interesting. So yeah, he recorded it live at UCB, which is, he's a UCB member, so that was awesome. Where did you first find Paul F. Tompkins?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I obviously when I first started comedy, I think it was like 2009, and I was not a comedy nerd at all. Like I kind of knew what the
Mhm.
ones everyone knows, like the big guys, but I didn't know all the like independent like the the comedians, and I slowly started to learn them over time, and I would say my first comedian I discovered was Maria Bamford, who is
Mhm.
just brilliant, but I could never isolate one album from her. It's just her essence, but
Yes.
yeah, it's just everything she's about. But Paul F. Tompkins, I had a couple guy friends who kept telling me like, "Oh, so funny, peanut brittle." But I kind of was getting, if anything, like annoyed. Like, those friends you have that they'll like show you a TV show and then watch you watching it and like
Yeah.
laugh way too hard at all the jokes, and you're like, "Okay, I'm so off put by this." So I was like, whatever, Paul F. Tompkins. Like, I didn't look into him for a very long time. I just knew he was like a darling of the comedy world. And
Mhm.
then I actually it was at like I'd already moved to Toronto, so it was after 2017. I was at JFL and I was going to Nicole Byer's live podcast recording, and he was the guest. And I was like, "Oh, that's cool. This is that Paul F. Tompkins guy that everyone's in love with." And like, he was so charming that I was like, "Okay, I've seen bits and bobs from him and always thought they were fun, but I've never fully dove in."
Mhm.
So I was like, I'm gonna listen to his album. And I remember it so vividly because I was working as a nanny at the time. Um, my mom had recently passed away, so I had this whole new job, and it was kind of easy to like just throw myself into this whole new job and have a whole new life and not face these very real feelings I was having. Like there was nothing that was reminding me of my mom. I was like, whatever. But I think I was in a really weird spot. And I was like, okay, I'm going to throw this on because the nanny job was often just like cleaning and puttering around the house.
Mhm.
So, and then I was walking their family dog, listening to this album. And when I heard the peanut brittle joke, I like couldn't walk anymore. Like I was laughing so hard that I had to like stop walking. Like I was just standing in the middle of the street laughing so hard, and then I just went whole hog. I listened to like every one of his albums. I started looking at sketches. I started listening to Comedy
Mhm.
Bang Bang more frequently. I'm still not as much of a super fan as I suspect you might be, but I know the lore, and
Yeah.
I love him. I'm in love with him. The Neighborhood Listen is a podcast I recently got hooked onto, and I'm like, this man is just perfect.
Yeah. I mean, I think I first time I encountered him was on Mr. Show. He was like one of the cast members and writers there, but I don't think he really matured. Like he hadn't bloomed at that point. Because you look at that,
Yeah.
you look at like him and Jack Black. They're all so young there. It's like they hadn't really found like how awesome they were.
Yeah.
Like it's his. He has this joke in the album about being a sissy.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't, and it's like he I feel that was very personal, but he bloomed like me into a dandy. With
Yeah.
his fancy suits and his elegant fancy talk.
Yes.
Um, and it's like I think later on, and like his love of improv. That's the thing I really like. And like I love when he's Santa or Cake Boss on Comedy Bang Bang, and like then where he's Santa and Lauren Lapkus comes on and she's Ho Ho the elf, and it's just like
Yeah.
he has this great energy and he plays with people. Have you ever had a chance to see him do improv?
Well, I saw sort of like I saw the live comedy Bang Bang when it came to town last year.
Yeah.
And so they're sitting around, but he was improvising as I can't remember this character's name, but he's the guy who's the neighbor to the Sugar Hill Gang.
Oh yeah.
And it was again some of the funniest stuff. Like I had to like sneakily, I never want to bother anyone, but I sneakily recorded on my phone because there was some improv they were doing where he was talking, but then they kind of went on to something else. And then anytime you looked at him, he was still like silently talking. And it was one of the funniest things. And I just like have footage on my phone of him just like sitting in the background, silently moving his mouth, being such a silly Billy. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd love to see him really get up and like mess around and go nuts, but that was still such a treat to get to see that.
Yeah. I got lucky. There was a last minute addition to JFL 42 a few years ago. It was him and Mark Evan Jackson from Brooklyn Nine-Nine and The
Oh,
Good
okay. Yeah,
Place. Um, and it was just the two powerhouses of
yeah.
improv. It's like improv, I love improv. When it's bad, it's really, really bad.
It's the hardest art form to watch when it's
Yeah.
bad, I would say, in the comedy world, I would
Yeah,
say.
yeah. But when it is good, it is like, is I would say that show, there's two improv shows that are like, this is life-changing improv. It was that and Chris Gethard.
Oh, wow.
So both I got to see at JFL.
Ugh,
One was this one where it just hit like the energy between Paul and Mark. It was a perfect synergy. It's like they
ugh,
knew each other, they knew how to share the stage, they knew how to use the gets that they got. It was beautiful. And the other was Chris Gethard, who did a two-hander with a bottle of water. So it
oh
was
my
just him
god.
and his scene partner was a bottle of water. And it was both of those times were the best improv where I'm like, yeah,
Ugh.
improv is awesome. And it's not like comedies comedians who are like, oh, improv is just silly. And it's like, no, it's good.
No,
It just
it's
has to be done
beautiful.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's oh god, I wish I could skip to that part as an improviser because I just know I don't wanna go through the part where I suck and I'm playing Zip Zap Zob, but if I could just find a scene partner to like I do love when you have that's even conversationally with comedians. If they think they hate improv, they're wrong because they spend their whole conversations riffing. Like,
Yeah.
it's with comedians so often hard to get them to stop riffing and be like, okay, but I was in the middle of a story. Like, so it's like you're building worlds on worlds on worlds all the time. Like, don't say that you're above improv. And yeah, two people who are just able, or one person. I'm so jealous of the Chris Gethard thing. Like, I mean, Paul F. Tompkins, I guess because I've seen him live a couple times, but
Mhm.
Chris Gethard, I saw him do his hour at JFL once when he was talking about Gator World.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's so funny and there's something about him that's so at the center of my heart. I'm like, whatever is wrong with him is wrong with me. Like I just get it. Like when he talks about any of his neuroses, I'm just like, yeah, like it feels I would be one of those annoying fans who's like, I feel like we'd be friends. Like
I so Tracy Hamilton opened for him last time he was in
Mhm.
Toronto, and I went to that show, and I tried to just say like, "Hey, I really love your stuff," and the nervous energy off of him during that interaction, I'm like, "Oh, I will never bother this poor man ever
Oh
again,"
god.
because it's
Yeah.
like on stage he's so confident, but I think that
Mhm.
he's honest about it. He has anxiety issues and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I felt genuinely bad after that. Where I'm like, I asked Tracy, "Is it okay if I go and say hi to him?" And like, she's like, "Yeah, yeah." But it's like, I'm never gonna do that ever
Yeah.
again.
That's
Yeah.
a good thing to realize. Like there was one time I felt so terrible. It was again at JFL. I love going to the In Conversation With at JFL. Those
Hmm.
are my favorite parts. And we went to see Jenny Slate, and she spent an entire hour being so honest about the vulnerabilities and the way that she sees fame and not being a typical kind of famous person. And then I was so disheartened because at the end of the show, she kind of took a wrong turn and ended up in front of like all of us when I think she was just trying to like scuttle off to the bathroom or something. And
Yeah.
everyone started going nuts. And she's this tiny, tiny woman. And she looked at all of us like, oh, and you could tell she was like, I guess I have an obligation as a public persona to like be pleasant, but you could tell she just felt trapped. And I was like, guys, leave her alone. Like I was
Yeah.
just like, it is an interesting beast being someone who's an introvert who loves to perform.
Yeah.
And how you handle that and how people then relate to you on such a level that they feel like, no, but me, Jenny, but it's like
Yeah. Look, we
30
could be
people saying
friends.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like, but you don't understand. The whole room thinks that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, so the album, like, I love it. Like, okay, I'm gonna just say off the top, the goth girl is a joke. I like, but at the same time, being a retired goth, with like still 98% of my wardrobe is black.
Yeah.
It hits a little funny because I'm like, okay, the joke is he realizes he's being an asshole here. Like
Yeah.
that is the core of the joke. But at the same time, I'm like, I've had that and vampires aren't real yelled at me from so many cars. It just like it's
Oh.
triggering. It's like, oh, but
That's so funny because I definitely spent some time, I would say, as like a goth poser. Like, I think I would have fit in more with like how Gen Z will like change their entire aesthetic and at the drop of a hat. Like, I
yeah.
was very that where I was like trying different things on. I never got, maybe they were yelling at me. I've just always had great big headphones on, but I don't know. Like, yeah, I definitely have, obviously, I'm a woman. I've had things yelled at me through cars. And I think actually, as a woman, it probably would have been a treat if it were more about my gothness than my womanness.
Mhm.
But I get that though, that he's like, um, taking delight in this. What it's like someone saying, oh, no price tag, guess it's free. Like he thinks he came
Yeah.
up with it. And you're like, no, dude, I've heard it before.
No, and what I appreciate about it, like ultimately, like when he gets to the end, he's like, "Yeah, I'm still an asshole," kind of thing. Or
Yeah.
he's like joking about like the joke is that he really wants this joke to work, and he knows it. He knows he's just
Yeah.
being a dick.
And
But
he
yeah,
and the fact that he has to repeat it multiple times, like, I will find so many sly ways to work into conversation something funny I said in an earlier conversation, and I'm like, "Oh my
Mhm.
god," like, it's such a greasy instinct to be like, "I just need you to hear this off the cuff funny thing I said earlier," and I like, as a comedian, like, who definitely has that instinct, I was like, "I like that he's calling that out."
Yeah, yeah. And I one day I would, if I ever meet him, I'm gonna have to find footage though because goths we do run every year. There's a comedy or not a comedy, a music festival in Whitby, which is where in England, which is where Dracula's castle is, because of
Oh,
course it is.
yeah,
I've been a couple of times,
mhm,
and there's an annual football match, like soccer match. So there's
yeah,
like two full squads of goths playing football against each other.
wow.
So they can run, they can head a
They
ball,
are,
like yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But
I think
we are
the
safety conscious. He was very correct on that. Those boots will kill you.
Yeah, I have to find some, like, yeah, appropriate, black sneakers for that event, but I'm sure you know what? He's a man of the world, I'm sure he's aware of this event, but it would be fun to talk about
Yes.
it with him.
Yeah, yeah. Now one of the things I've really enjoyed about this is like it all even when he's not in character, it's kind of in character because he's kind of playing up like kind of an obnoxious
Yes.
personality.
The
Um,
rich, the like, "Oh, I go to Banana Republic and I buy shirts 2 at a time," and I say, "Well, if it doesn't fit, I'll throw it out."
yeah,
I love
like
I love
I'm
that.
so rich, I just sometimes I get bored of throwing money away, so I'll just eat it because I'm a quarter goat on my maternal grandfather kind of thing. It's like, yeah, it's just he's and it runs through the entire thing. So it's like, and he'll just sort of heighten, and he has a very good instinct I find in this album of when to heighten and when to sort of like let it go a bit, which is
Yes.
hard because a lot of the times I find a lot of comedians, if they are doing a character, they just lean so hard into it. It's
Yeah.
hard to find where the voice is, or they can't transition very well.
That's probably, I'm realizing in the moment, why I love this album so much and why I love Paul so much. I've, because, like, I this is the only album I make comedy albums for a living. This is the only album I, like, listen to multiple times because normally when I'm enjoying comedy, I wanna be, like, watching it, usually
Mhm.
live. Um or I'll listen to an album and love it and be like, "Great, thank you." But this I listen to as a comfort listen, and probably the reason it's so comforting to me is I like what you said that he comes in and out of the character because when I'm on stage, I do a bit of like, "Oh, I'm so fabulous," and like usually when I'm playing up how very not fabulous I am or something I'm self-conscious about.
Mhm.
And people often say, "Oh, I love that character you're doing." And I'm like, didn't you notice though that I was kinda coming in and out of it and kind of doing,
Mhm.
like, different voices depending on what was required of the joke and, like, leaning into it really hard sometimes and not other times? And to say that that's a character, to me, I'm like, "No, that's just the truest expression of what's going on in my head," because, like, when you're, like, um dressed a certain way, the way that you're hoping the world perceives you versus how you're actually feeling on the inside, and like probably that comes back to like my goth roots of being like, oh god, I just need to look like in control, like so maybe
Yeah, yeah.
maybe I'll just be goth, I don't know. And yeah, that's true that like he's doing this character but it's not a character. It feels like a tool he's using to
Mhm.
express, like, even in the "I'm so rich" joke, it's like he's like, "Look, I'm not making as much money from the entertainment industry as I thought I was going to," is
Yeah,
ultimately what he's saying, but he's like, "Oh, no, my life, oh, it's fabulous," and, like, I really identify with that.
yeah, yeah. And it's like, I mean, the and this is my favorite bit, the elegant balloons,
Yeah.
which is when he like when it's like there's like different, it's like a different size screwdriver for each joke kind of thing. And this is the
Yeah.
really big one. Oh, I'm gonna have just some kings and dukes. We'll see who shows up. And just like it goes all the way to the big screwdriver when it comes to that joke. But then like,
Yeah.
he dials it back for other ones and like alternative pet. Yeah, there's two where I felt really singled out. Alternative pet because I used to have a ferret and a rat, and I would
Yeah.
carry them around with me. I'm like, ooh, I am so seen right now, Paul. Not in a good way. But yeah, like he just like the way he uses sarcasm and tone. It's just elegant in a way you don't often see with a lot of performers.
And that takes me to what I was saying earlier about these are things I would discourage in a lot of performers, especially like starting out on their first album. It's funny that it's called Impersonal because it kind of is. Like he's not revealing much about himself. He's making fun of things he thinks are so stupid and he's
Yeah.
being so sarcastic. Yeah, also as a girl with a bunny, I felt called out by that. And like he's there's a couple times he gets like kind of mean, like, oh, daylight savings time was another one where I
Yeah.
was like, "Paul, that actually does wreak havoc on my sleep schedule." Um,
Or it's like the jazz one, like, oh, my brain is so wrinkly. You're just dum dums. I feel sad on your behalf.
Yeah. He really digs in, and he's really like, it does feel like kind of your first instinct as a comedian, which is to like point at things that annoy you.
Mm,
But yeah, he really, I often want more. For the most part, if I heard this kind of material from anyone else, I would be like, okay, but who are you? Like, what do
yeah.
you like? What do you do day to day? Like, tell a story. But for some reason with him, I'm fine if he's just revealing who he is through how he attacks his observational subject matter,
Yeah.
as opposed to actually coming out and saying, this is the kind of person I am. Like, there's so much honesty within, yeah, the observations that could feel very impersonal from someone else.
And it's just, like you said, is you would discourage this from so many people, but I don't, is some kind of weird magic that he weaves where it works where it doesn't work. Like, and I think there, for me, it's the dumb stuff that he litters throughout. Like, there's smart, really smart jokes next to really dumb faux outrage stuff.
Yeah.
Like, like you have like this alternative pet where the gist of it is really these people are manufacturing a personality out of this poor animal who probably just wants to sit on a rock and
Hmm.
play with a bell.
Yeah.
Next to like freaking out over Spanish and how it's taught on Sesame Street,
Yeah.
and then going, "Oh, actually, I was wrong. Never mind."
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
following that up with Ghost Stromboli. You know?
Yeah. And that's the thing too. I was listening to Ghost Stromboli and I was like, man, I would find this so cringy from so many other artists. Like, because you kind of know where it's going.
Yeah.
Like the she's been dead for 20 years, like as a well-worn thing. But just, and even like the over the top character playing with so many other people, I'd be like, man, relax. Not every single person has to be a character. Or the point where
Mm.
he talks about the migrant worker
Yes.
experience and then he does the accent and he's like, and I know I shouldn't still be doing it, but I'm still doing it. And like, he's just, but I think it's all in the, I think it's because he's doing it for the pure delight rather
Mm.
than like, I think this is funny. What if this was funny? Because I have noticed I've been going to some storytelling events, and something I really admire about storytellers is they don't have this desperate need to be liked that comedians do, or at least
Yeah.
not in a way that I can tell yet, being new to the scene, where comedians are like, oh, I'd better put something silly right here. Otherwise, people will stop listening to me. And I think that's not present here. He really
Yeah.
is like, I genuinely wanted to go too far with that one joke, or I genuinely wanted to go over the top here. Like, it's never in service of the audience. It's just because that's what feels good to him.
And you can tell that in a lot of these because you hear these delightful giggles
Yeah.
at the end of the bits where where it's fading out. And you can hear him laughing to himself,
Yeah.
having fun in that moment. And I kind of think I think you hit the nail on the head there. He's doing it for himself, which
Yeah.
that way it doesn't feel so cringe because he's not trying to force the audience to enjoy it. And I mean, he's by 2007, he was already relatively well established in LA where he recorded this. So he had an audience that was on side with him to begin
Yeah.
with, which helps on an album. Because if you have it I've been doing album reviews and like sometimes where you're listening to an album, just the audience isn't on the same page. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, it doesn't matter how good the material is. If you don't have the audience on board, it's just going to suck the life out of an album.
Yeah, or if
So,
it sounds very like Pete Holmes talks about audiences that only give you the blue book value of each joke, where they'll like
yeah.
laugh for exactly as long as they're supposed to and then stop. You don't get those rolling laughs. But here
Mhm.
you're like, yeah, these people love him. Like, I was actually going to ask like what you thought about, because I was kind of shocked when I re-listened to it knowing we were going to talk about it. Then I'm like, oh, there's no please welcome to the stage Paul F. Tompkins. And he's kind of just goes into it but you can hear the audience giggling before he even says anything. So there's this sense that like there was a moment before, there
Mhm.
was something that they've been having fun all night, and now he's like, all right, press record, I'm warmed up. Like it like feels very I don't know, like in some ways I could almost argue that that might be alienating to some people because it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you just got here? Well, we've been having fun for a while now." But
Yeah,
like
like getting late to the show kind of thing. But
yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Now you notice it really stands out to me. I didn't think of it. So yeah, I'm so used to the traditional format and welcome to the stage kind of thing, like the opener or the host of the show welcoming. I just think it really lends to the format in a way. Like the entire structure is just these little vignettes of
Mhm.
funny and and we're sort of seeing slivers of a night that was bigger than what we got to enjoy.
Yeah.
Uh, and I again like anyone else, any other album, I don't think it would work. But for some reason, it just magically gels.
It just works, and yeah, it's interesting, that I want something to have this kind of, like, through line, these days because growing up, this is traditional stand-up, like, I call it, like, joke
Mhm.
salad, where, like,
Yeah.
all the JFL galas I watched growing up that were just on were like, "Here's this joke, here's this joke, here's this joke," and
Mhm.
none of them had anything to do with the last one or the first or the one coming next. They would just be like, "My wife, yeah, it's kind of weird when people with dogs do this. Oh, I was at the grocery store the other day," and it's all just. And it's so funny that now that I've been in comedy, I'm like, and I think the tone of the scene has shifted where now you kind of want them to lead you through and give you those segues. And yeah, it was interesting looking at this being kind of maybe in the middle of that, like on the precipice of that new thing, because there are
Mhm.
through lines in the sense of, like you said, him being very grandiose, him being kind of self-deprecating, him being like, uh, this is my worldview, but it does still have that old school stand-up aesthetic of like joke, next joke, next joke.
Yeah. It's interesting, and in a lot of his aesthetic and the way he presents himself, he sort of has a sort of old school vibe to a
Mhm.
lot of what he does. So I feel it's a very deliberate decision on his point, especially like at this time in LA. This is like the height of the alt comedy boom in
Mhm.
2007 when it was sort of blowing up. You had like Patton doing Fugazi shows and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like so it's an interesting time, and I could almost see him like pushing back a bit on that and leaning into these older sort of structures just to remind people of their relevance and
Yeah.
I
It's
enjoy the through line as well. Like I mean I sort of grew up with storyteller comics a lot as like my early entry points. Um, but I also grew up with people like Steve Martin and
yeah.
so it's just like which is very much that bang bang bang.
Yeah.
And Robin Williams. So it's like I had those sort of two worlds. Um, but yeah, I kind of I appreciate it when you're sort of carried along and there's actually a destination. It's yes, it's
Mhm.
about being funny, but it's also about going somewhere. Um,
Yeah, and telling a story, and he is capable of that, so I think you're right that,
yeah.
like, he was just like, "Look, I wanna do my first album old school showbiz," or wait, does he have albums before this one?
No, I believe this is his first.
Okay. Yeah, I thought so. I thought I looked into that. I just want to make sure. I don't want any Paul F. Tompkins heads coming after me. But I think he because I have a similar thing where I'm like I want to remind people of old world showbiz, like I want to wear a nice outfit on stage and I want to say, "Oh, hello, nice to be here." And like I want it to I don't want it to feel like, who cares?"
Yeah.
So I think makes sense, like you said, that he would be like, okay, everyone's kind of doing this other thing. I'm going to remind people what stand up's always been. Because then it's interesting because, like, he has his other album, Crying and Driving. Is
Mhm.
that what it's called? Or Crying While Driving? Crying and Driving.
Crying and Driving, yeah.
Where it's like it is about him growing up and the different ways in which he's growing up. So he's very capable of that
Mhm.
storytelling kind of thing. So yeah, I think you're right. He probably picked that on purpose.
So do you have a favorite bit? I have a suspicion what it might be, but do you have a favorite bit from the album?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously the peanut brittle.
Yeah.
I would love to be more I would love to be more original and be like, "Oh, it's not the most famous joke that he has." But I just like, it kinda gets me every time because there's so many parts to it, and it
Mhm.
reminds me of the favorite jokes that I've written where I'm like, "Oof, if I'm gonna tell that one, I'm gonna have to go over it for, like, an hour because it's this part, then this part, then this part," and they're all so intricate and, like, there's so many compartments to it, and he's also being I think everything on the album converges there because he's being
Yeah.
an asshole. He's like, "Why does this exist? That's so stupid." And then he gets so sarcastic for so long, but then
Mhm.
he gets he's really I really love his personification of the person opening the peanut brittle, and he and when he's like, "Oh, my heart is beating like a jackrabbit." I
I
I
have
was
blood in my ears.
I use that line all the time, and I love how, like, sincere that person is, but
Mhm.
that, of course, makes it that much more sarcastic that this person exists in this world because they're so unrealistically earnest. Um, I just yeah, and, like, the, I think why I love it is because it's so common. Like, there's just so many good lines.
Yeah, yeah, like, "Oh, he almost hit me in the eye with his fang," kind of thing. It's just like, "Oh, a coil cover of spring covered in vinyl? Oh."
Well, sir, you have fooled me twice. I, it's almost good, honestly, that I didn't hear this while I was building my voice because
Mhm.
I have I can draw from a similar well to Paul F. Tompkins, and it's so nice to, hear someone that I feel like if there's a universe in comedy, we're in the same one. But be like, oh, but I didn't know about him really when I was building this for myself. And if anything, he helped me refine it in terms of like how far to lean into a character versus not. But like it's so nice to be like, oh, um, we ended up there and it wasn't because I was going, I kind of want to do a Paul F. Tompkins thing. Like, it's nice, yeah, just to feel like I wasn't like ripping him off. I felt the same way when
Mhm.
I watched I was late to the party with Schitt's Creek and I was like, oh fuck, I've kind of been doing a Moira Rose thing, but I did not know that that's what I was doing. So it's
And
fine
and
because I
technically, I saw you doing that kinda thing before Moira Rose was even a character, so if
yeah.
anything, they ripped you
She got
off.
she got it from me. She
Yes.
was Catherine O'Hara, oh my god, if Catherine O'Hara was lurking in the shadows at one of my shows, that would be, that would be an honor. I would
Yes.
love to be ripped off by Catherine O'Hara. Oh, and that segues into something I told you when I was first like, I I was like, I regretfully would love to talk about Paul F. Tompkins because I am a champion for women in the scene.
Mhm.
Howl and Roar is works with predominantly women, and there's so many good women who have shaped my sense of humor so profoundly. But it's so funny that I was like, I kind of gotta talk about because this is the one, like this is like my burger and fries. Like it's like
Yeah.
my I kind of need a giggle. We're throwing Impersonal on. We're throwing that on for another spin.
Well, speaking of Howl and Roar, I mean, I just went to Tracy Hamilton's release party and Isabel
Yeah.
Totten's recording. You record some amazing performers. Are there any that you'd like to mention or talk about today?
Yeah, gosh. Yeah, we really do. We are blessed with the people we get to work with. There are so many people who and I kind of get to like learn from them as well. So I
Mhm.
get to like sneakily work on my craft as I help them work on theirs. I mean, you just named two of the ones I'm most excited about, Tracy Hamilton and Isabel Zotten. I just think Tracy, actually, they're very interesting to put next to each other because also Tracy opened for Isabel, and the launch
Mhm.
party and the recording happened within days of each other. So I would call Tracy's like our rising star. Like she's like rising through the ranks, and she's such a Virgo in terms of how organized she is and how she
Mm.
attacks her career, and it just every move makes sense, and you're like, yep. And she gets uh kind of the exact result of her actions every time. It's like, oh, you did really well, you get a gala, honey. Like, and it's
Yeah.
like, yep, I saw that for her, I saw that for her. And it's such a pleasure to see someone who I want to be rewarded in such a way. Like, there
Mhm.
are people in the world who understand the marketing of comedy, but not the comedy itself. So they're very all sizzle, no steak. Tracy
Yeah.
Hamilton is sizzle and steak, and people are she's reaping the rewards of that, and I know it's just going to grow. Isabel has been so funny for so long,
Mhm.
so talented in so many different areas and different ways, and so whip smart, and just fascinating. But it's interesting that like my boyfriend Kyle did her intro, and he said
Mhm.
something I very much agree with, where he was like, she has a lot of credits. Like does TV writing. She did a Winnipeg Comedy Fest gala this year, but she still feels somehow underrated. Like, I still feel like I got a shout from the rooftops, like, everybody's got to listen to Isabel Zotten and know how funny she is. And like, I'm so excited for her to have an album that's going to be this showcase of her body of work thus far, that the world can discover along with me. I know she's going to get a ton of plays on Sirius XM. I just know it because
Yeah.
all the they're all so well written, and they're all like beginning, middle, end, da 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 da. The audience laughs in all the right parts, perfect. So it's really exciting to see. I'm very excited for the both of them. They're very different. Their careers have different kind of tones to them, but two people I'm
Mhm.
very excited about. Um, and then, who else can I talk? Oh, Andy McQueen,
Mhm.
one of my absolute favorite. And Hot Dog in Every Pocket is the name of the album. And talk about alt comedy, like just talk about letting your freak flag fly and not worrying if the audience gets it or not. And of course the audience does, but Andy's like, I'm doing my thing. That was an album that I was so excited to edit and put out in the world and for people to hear, because they have a whole joke about a hard-boiled egg. That's I guess I like food jokes.
Food jokes, they're one of those universally accessible. Like
Yeah,
everybody has something about food. Everybody can relate on that.
100%. I have had, as a woman, a complicated relationship with food and my body, and I've been back and forth with the overeating and the undereating. So, um yeah, another silly man in the industry that gets me giggling is Jim Gaffigan. And
Oh
another
God.
one who, if someone came to me and they were like, I think I'm going to do a thing where I only ever talk about food and call myself fat, even though I'm actually not very fat, I would be like, whoa, 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 you're doing it all wrong. Like, I would discourage so much. But he gives me the belly laughs like no other. And I think it's just a relief to talk about food, because it was something that I had a complicated relationship for so long that I maybe like couldn't laugh about at certain times in my life. And
Yeah.
now it's like, even Andy has this super funny joke where they're like, I have this kind of controversial opinion where I think that women should eat. And I love that line so much. And they're so silly while making so many good points as well. And they talk
Mhm.
about their gender identity and all this. And that was something they told me. Now my mind is making all these connections. They really wanted to talk about gender because it's something they wouldn't have found funny at a certain point, that they've now like figured out how to be funny about it and invite everyone in on this journey and be like, it's okay. It can be kind of painful and weird and funny all at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's my relationship with food. It's like, oh, if you just feel so relieved. So jokes about food make me laugh really hard because I've repaired my relationship with it.
I mean, I think that's those things where everybody has a journey, and
Mm-hmm.
if excuse me, if it's personal and you invite people into that personal space, that can build such rapport with an audience that you can
Mm-hmm.
go anywhere with them,
Yeah.
and that's really incredible.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I love um like that Jim Gaffigan is this arguably this everyman, especially if you put him next to Paul F. Tompkins. But they're both like, I think that's another thing, maturing as a comedian too, and as a comedy album producer, seeing the beauty in every kind of comedy and not
Mhm.
being like, it has to be this or it has to be that. Even if something's not necessarily for me, I can see who's going to love it and who needs to hear this album. And that's something nice about maturing in the comedy scene is you can just start to see the beauty in all of it.
But like my wife loves Chris Rock, and
Mhm.
I mean, he's one of those comedians where I'm like, I appreciate the skill. I know he's amazing at what he does. Just doesn't click with me. And
Yes.
we got tickets, and there was like half the show I loved, half the show I was like, eh, whatever. She loved the entire thing, and that's the thing. It's not like there's a snobbery to comedy that's a lot like when I was a teenager and how I felt with music. Where it's like,
Yeah.
well, it's not this band. Well, yeah, they're not real. Or like, I was listening to Nirvana a year before anybody else was, kind of thing. And it's like now, though, it's like I'm like, oh, pop music is still incredible, because
Yeah.
it still takes skill and talent and craftsmanship. And the same with comedy, like just because a type of comedy isn't for me doesn't mean it isn't good. It just means
Yeah.
I'm not the audience. It's like Bill Burr is like one of those comedians where it's like a lot of his stuff doesn't land for me, but I
Yeah.
know a lot of people that it resonates incredibly with, and sometimes he gets a little rough in ways that I don't feel comfortable. But that
Mhm.
again, that doesn't mean it's bad. It means he's talking to an audience in a way that's going to resonate with them, and hopefully they get the intent, which I
Yes.
deconstructing his jokes, I always feel the intent is positive. Like he is
Often, yeah.
generally punching up most of the time.
Yes, there are jokes of his that unfortunately were some of the first jokes I heard where I was like, "Ooh, that I can't see the good in." But I think he's often pointing fingers at toxic masculinity.
Mhm.
And yeah, I can't I can't watch anyone who's just yelling for too long.
Yeah, there's a few comedians like that. I never like Sam Kinison. He was all
Yeah.
over the place in the '80s when I was watching like brick wall comedy on TV at midnight,
Yeah.
and it's just like, how is this funny?
Yeah.
I don't like.
Like, let's have some levels here, man.
Yeah, yeah, like it's too much cocaine. Just too much cocaine.
But
Well,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree, but then, yeah, with someone if that's how someone's gonna receive that message, then, like, great, and like you said, I just hope they're receiving it in the right way because that's something like, uh, there are people like, back in the day when Sarah Silverman was being offensive in an
Mm.
ironic way, and then she realized some people weren't picking up on the irony and that she had to refine that a bit. And I'm like, yeah, like that is something to consider as well. That's not necessarily your responsibility, but it is an interesting discussion of like, how's it landing on people's ears? And I do hope with someone like Bill Burr that it's landing that like, he's making fun of my toxic masculinity, not telling me that it's cool and good.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
and people's tool sets evolve over time, and Bill Burr now is very different in many ways than he was when he was a young comic, and everybody like
Yeah.
Jim Gaffigan. He is genuinely one of my favorite comedians. Period,
Mhm.
because he's has that skill to go dark while still being family friendly at the same
Yes.
time, and just these very subtle ways. Or he did this two specials. One, I think, I can't remember where the second country was, but first country was Canada, and he the Pale Tourist, and it was all about, he's got family from Nova Scotia, so they visited there, and there are Acadians who were kicked out, so he talks about history, and he talks about like he has a joke about the provinces that only, it's so true, but only a non-Canadian could make, about like all the provinces are kind of like siblings, and
Oh, yeah.
can't, like Ontario and Quebec are like brothers but with a different mother, and like Ontario is inherited the family business, and Quebec are the cool ones, and
Yes,
it's
this
just
is ringing some bells now.
yeah, it's such a clear picture of Canada, but not in a mean way kind of thing,
Yeah.
whereas like, and that's just what I love, like you don't have to be mean, and
No.
yeah.
I just posted, I've been trying to post on Howl and Roar. We always post quotes from different
Mhm.
comedians, and I try and post people who align with my values, in just like a way of just putting my values out there without necessarily, because we represent so many different comedians. I don't want to be like, this is the voice of Howl
Yeah.
and Roar. But I loved Jay Jordan had a quote that was, I want comedy to be good and of good. And I love that idea of just like of good intent. Like even if you're going dark, that the reason behind the joke isn't purely to just go like neener, 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 that it is
Yeah.
to maybe get a point across or point out the absurdity in something, or yeah, I like that. Good and of good, I think, is when you can get to the heart of anyone's jokes and that's there, then I'm like, great. And that's why like Paul F. Tompkins, I don't think he's actually, he did get kind of politically as a joke, making fun of people who still eat Chick-fil-A, and that was funny. And I love, everyone look that up. You can find it. It's a very funny little rant just about how stupid that is.
Yeah.
And but for the most part, he's just being in service of people feeling nice, and I think that can be quite a noble thing.
Well, on that note, if people wanted to find you or Howl and Roar, where could they look?
Yeah, you can look on, I like Instagram the most. We're on the different platforms, but I like Instagram the most. So you can find us at Howl_Roar. And you can find me at Melanie Dahling, all one word, on Instagram. I'm still trying to figure out how to exist on TikTok. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm scrolling on there if you want to send me a fun vid. But yeah, I follow me in case I figure it out. But yeah, I'm usually on Instagram.
Well, thanks very much for joining us, and hopefully you can come back and maybe we can talk about some of these Howl and Roar albums.
Yeah, yeah, we can have a Howl and Roar album party. That would be fun.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for coming out.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Comedy Album Book Club, a Far From Here comedy and ShowbizMonkeys.com co-production. Music today was performed and produced by Glenn Bouchamp, Tim Matthews, Edith Falkenberg, and Jim Spruill, also known as the Something Something Quartet. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week to Comedy Album Book Club.